What's up guys, welcome back to my channel. It is currently January 28th or 29th. I'm not actually sure what day it is, but I am sure where I am, and I am at the Encore, walking over to the poker room, getting ready to play some 1-3, 2-5, whatever I can hop on. Very, very excited to be back in Vegas where we're actually allowed to film. Unfortunately, not allowed to film at the MGM properties right now. Not sure what's going on there. I know some bigger vloggers have posted about it. Hopefully some of those guys can flex their vlogging muscles and get that rule changed. But for now, we're at the Wynn. I'm excited, ready to go. Let's get right into the action. We start things off in under the gun +1 and look down at ace-jack offsuit. Now, I'm really not a fan of ace-jack, but supposedly it's a pretty good hand. So I open things up with a bet of $15. The small blind calls, the big blind calls, and we're three ways to a flop of king, queen, 5, 2 clubs. Small blind checks, the big blind takes the lead now and bets out $20. Don't really have a whole lot going on this board, but we do have a gut shot to the nuts and the backdoor nut flush draw as well, so I make the call. The small blind calls as well, so we're three ways to a turn of the 6 of hearts. Small blind checks again, and the big blind continues now for $30. That card really didn't improve us much, but for such a cheap price, I think we can call here and potentially win with any ace or 10. Not to mention, if another club comes out, we do have the nut blocker, so we could maybe bluff on a river. The small blind calls as well. The river is now the 3 of clubs. Small blind checks again. The big blind kind of takes a while, stacking and unstacking chips. Really looks like he's trying to make up his mind on a sizing here. He eventually decides on a sizing of $50. Now, I had called with intention to bluff on any club river. However, reading this player's body language, you know, blockers are nice to have, but sometimes they just have it, blockers are not. I decide to wait for a better spot and fold. I don't really regret the way I played this one. I think we had a good plan in place, just when the river came, decided to abort the mission, and that's gonna happen sometimes. In the next hand, we look down at a premium in the big blind, ace-queen offsuit. Middle position opens to $10. It folds around to me. I raise things up to $35. It gets back to the original raiser middle position, who now jams for 300? Man, I really love this hand, and it feels terrible to have to fold pre-flop, but I can't think of a worse hand that takes this line. In the absolute best case scenario, maybe we're up against jacks and we're flipping at best. I don't even think that jacks takes this line though. I think 9 times out of 10, we're up against aces, kings, or ace-king in this spot, all of which have us basically drawing dead. So I make the quick fold and we're off to the next one, but I will be keeping an eye on this player. In the next hand, we look down at ace-jack offsuit, this time in the cutoff. There's a straddle for $10, and after a few players limp and it gets to me, this really should be a raise, but man, do I hate ace-jack. I really don't like this hand, but I don't hate it enough to fold. I do just make the call. The button folds, and we're three ways to a flop of ace-jack 7, 2 clubs. I'm not sure if my eyes are deceiving me or not. Did we actually just flop a good hand with ace-jack? Let's go! Finally! Early position bets $10, the hijack calls, and we are certainly not going to be playing for that cheap. I raise things up to $30. Looking back, I do think this should be a much larger size, more like $45 to $60, but at the time I bet 30 and both players make the call. The turn is the 5 of clubs. It checks around to me, and I continue now with a bet of $60. Early position folds, but the hijack now raises things up to $150. After checking twice and raising here, this play looks a little fishy. It's possible this player just has the flush, but there are an awful lot of draws out there. King jack, queen jack, king queen, 8-9, 9-10. There's a lot of possibilities out there. His hand could have one club, specifically the jack of clubs would be a really big one here, or he could have none and be doing this to try to scare me out. When we're in a spot like this, I like having a hand that can improve. In this scenario, we can always boat up if we are up against a flush. I make the call. The river now comes the 9 of spades, and the hijack shoves all in for his remaining stack of about $150. This is a tough spot, but that 9 really didn't change anything on the river unless we were up against 10-8. I don't see 10-8 playing this way. If he has the flush, he's got us. If he has anything else, we have such a strong hand here with top 2. We've got to make the call in this spot. I make the call, and we get shown queen jack of clubs. Yeah, now that is about how I would expect an ace-jack hand to feel. We lose the max in this one, and it's starting to feel an awful lot like yesterday all over again. For our next wonderful win wager, we look down at king 4 of spades in the big blind. The button raises things up to $15. With a suited king and some evil intentions, I make the call. Under the gun calls as well, and we are now three ways to a flop. The flop comes king 10-3 with 2 hearts. I check, under the gun checks, and the button bets $45. We have top pair, a little over $160 left in our stack. There's already over 100 in the middle. Looks like we're gonna have to fight for these pots today. There's a good chance that we're best right now, and almost no cards can come on the turn that we're gonna like, except a king or a 4, so I shove. Under the gun folds, the button thinks for a little while, looks kinda curious, but does eventually put in the fold. Nice to win a hand for a change. A little aggression gets things done, and we rake in a small pot. In our next hand, we look down at king 10 offsuit in the cutoff. The hijack opens to 25. I make a speculative call, and the big blind calls as well. We're 3 ways to a flop of 10, 7, 6, rainbow. It checks to me, and with top pair good kicker, I bet out $40. The big blind calls, and the hijack folds. The turn is now the 10 of diamonds. The big blind checks again. We now have trips on a full rainbow board, and we are gonna keep putting money in this pot. I bet out $75. Big blind thinks for a little while, and eventually shoves. He covers me, and I don't love this spot, but I do make the call, figuring we're probably up against either a worse 10 or a draw. The river comes the 6 of diamonds, and the big blind turns over jack 10. That is a tough river for us. We had this guy crushed in a great spot, should have been an easy double up, but the river pairs the board, and we chop. Sometimes a chop like this feels an awful lot like a loss, but it is better than actually losing, so we move on. Shortly after that hand, I add on, but the dealer only has black chips available, so our stack does look a little funny here. In our next one, I have my absolute favorite kind of hand, suited connectors. It's always such a good time to imagine the straight flush possibilities that never actually get there. Under the gun +1 opens to 15. You know I'm in there. The big blind calls as well. We are 3 ways to a flop that comes slightly above average, 7, 7, 3, rainbow. Big blind checks. Under the gun +1 bets $30. We have this hand on lock for the time being. There's no need to scare our opponents away, so I just make the call and the big blind folds. We're now heads up to a turn, which is the ace of hearts. Under the gun +1 now slows down and checks. Now normally I think this ace should connect more with our opponent than with us, but the slowdown and check does make me think maybe it's a scare card and a bet would actually drive him out of this pot. So I decided to play this one a little bit tricky and check back, hoping to induce a bet from our opponent on the river. The river is now the 9 of hearts. Backdoor hearts do get there, and it's a little bit of a concern, but when under the gun +1 checks again, we can likely rule that out. I eventually decide on a smaller sizing of just $50, hoping to get a crying call from a 1-pair hand. Under the gun +1 obliges and does make the call. I show our hand, and he shows us pocket deuces. Apparently our check back on the turn worked. Not quite the way I had originally intended. We did not induce a bluff, but we induced a light call? Hey, I'll take it. In our next hand, we're in middle position and look down at king 8 suited. I limp for $5. The button raises to $25. This is a very aggressive player who just recently sat down and was waiting for a bigger game to open up. Usually, these types of guys tend to be a little bit looser since these stakes are smaller for them. What that means for us is that we don't have to respect their opening ranges quite as much. The big blind calls, I make the call, and we're 3 ways to a flop of queen 6 3, all spades. That is quite a scary board that we have missed entirely. The big blind checks, I check, and the button continues for $50. The big blind folds, and going back to what I said pre-flop, this player type is going to continue nearly 100% of the time on the button. He does not necessarily have to have a single spade in his hand in order to make this $50 bet. I do think that this is the kind of board with a check raise we can rep pretty hard though in this spot. We have a suited king. It could be spades, right? It doesn't have to be diamonds. That's how that works, I think. I decide to put in a check raise up to $120. And the big blind pretty quickly folds. Not a huge pot, but always happy to get a read, make a move, and take down some chips that we had absolutely no business winning. In the last interesting hand from this session, under the gun limps, and it folds to me in a middle position when I look down at ace queen off. I raise things to $25, the button calls, and it folds back to under the gun who now 3 bets up to $115. Now look, I've already folded ace queen off pre-flop once today. It is not about to happen a second time. I make the call, the button folds, and we're now heads up to a flop. The flop comes ace jack 8, rainbow. Under the gun now slows down and checks. I start thinking about what hands our opponent could have, what we could be up against here that we want to call from, maybe kings or queens, and what size to put out there to line up a potential all-in on the turn if it comes clean. I eventually land on a size of $150. Under the gun asks how much I have left in my stack, which is never a good sign when your opponent asks this. I tell him I have a little bit over 300 left, and he goes into the tank. He thinks for a little while and looks as if he's debating between a call or a fold. then starts carving out chips, significantly more chips than the $150 I put in the middle, and shows me what do I know when he neither calls nor folds, but instead jams all in. So the card on the board that actually worries me most in this spot is the jack, because now we lose to ace king, chop with ace queen, and lose to ace jack. Plus, we were already losing to aces, we're ahead of kings and queens, but now we're also losing to jacks. Despite all of this, I review the action in my head and I just can't see any of the hands that are ahead of us playing it this way. It's a dry board, a set of aces or jacks wouldn't want to scare anyone away, neither would two pair in my opinion. Maybe ace king would play it this way, but that's just one hand. There are a ton more hands that we're actually ahead of that might play things this way. So after thinking for a moment, I decide to make the call. Immediately after calling, I do have a question for my opponent.
You have ace king? Oh, okay, you have jacks?
We run it out, the turn is the 5 of clubs, and the river is the 10 of spades. Under the gun now announces, I got lucky, and flips over king, queen of hearts. I wish I could unmute the audio here to share my thoughts in real time after the hand, but it would all be censored out anyway. So, our opponent only had 4 outs in the deck, just 10s, other than of course running kings. We had him in an absolutely great spot, ace queen over king queen on an ace high board, made a great call, we're in a great position to double up, and unfortunately, once again, just took a bit of a bad beat. After the second consecutive day of getting felted in some nasty spots, I decide I've had enough, gather my things, and head out. Thanks for watching, guys. That's all for this one. That was a bit of a rough ending there. Got it in good, would play that exact hand that exact way every single time, just had a bad river and another bad beat. But, as you can tell, I am back at it right now at Borgata, waiting for my name to be called on the list for 2-5, and hoping to turn things around. Numbers, not great. Going through a bit of a downswing, but it happens to the best of us. I am very happy to report that the last few sessions back in New Jersey at Atlantic City have gone the opposite. I haven't been vlogging those sessions, however, because it is somewhat difficult not being able to record. I know I made those vlogs a while back with the still images, but I really prefer being able to use actual footage. Oh, pretty sure my name was just called, so I gotta go. Wish me luck. I wish all of you luck. Thanks again for watching. See you next time.